Why don't we talk a little bit about some of the stories that are in the news? Because I want to get to the what you referenced with fascism, but I think we should start with the news, which is right now Democrats are facing this dilemma, which is should they vote to keep the government open and give Republicans sort of what they want in this new continuing resolution measure, or should they shut it down? Can you talk a little bit about why they're in this? Not the politics of how we got here, but what is the substance of the dilemma right now for the Democrats?
So the dilemma for a bill passed the House. That bill is now in the Senate. It passed the House with all Republican votes, with the exception one Democrat did cross the aisle to vote for it. That bill is now in the Senate, but Republicans, even though they have 53 seats, they actually need Democratic votes to break the filibuster and to get at least 60 votes. So the Democrats, for the first time in the new Trump era, in the second term. For the first time, Democrats have a bit of leverage. Their votes are needed in order to pass this bill, and they're not sure of what to do. Number one, they don't want to be blamed for a shutdown. Shutdown, as we've seen over the last 30 years, whoever is blamed for the shutdown really has a hard time recovering from that. Government shutdowns are not popular, despite some of the rhetoric you hear from some politicians. And then number two, they're trying to figure out if the government were to shut down, that actually might not be so great for some of the goals of Democrats. For instance, Donald Trump right now is trying to close government agencies. And if a shutdown were to close those agencies for him, he might not reopen some of them. And that's something that Democrats don't really want to hand that to them. And then the third thing is if they were to allow a shutdown, it's not clear what path they would have to reopen the government, and that Donald Trump and Elon Musk and others might take advantage of a shutdown, blame the Democrats, and do things that the Democrats don't want. So Senate Democrats met a couple days ago, and they're meeting again today to try to understand what their position should be. Right now, they're holding firm ahead of the shutdown. Senator Chuck Schumer came out yesterday, right after the markets closed, actually, saying that Republicans don't have the votes. Democrats will not help them on this bill, and see where things stand. 24 hours later, it seems to be much the same place. It's my view that Schumer is his tough talk is mostly posturing, and that ultimately he wants to have a face-saving measure where Democrats can vote on a short-term continuing resolution, keep the government open, and even though that short-term resolution will fail with just Democratic votes, it would then allow Republicans to pass the bill that passed the House with under the 60 vote threshold. They would simply need a 51 vote majority. And if that were to happen, Democrats could have their vote saying, we tried to vote on this bill that we thought was better, but they don't have the majority, and then the government wouldn't shut down. That's kind of the way I think this is going to head. But as you well know, Jessica, it until we actually get to crunch time, which will happen sometime 24 hours from now, we're not sure how this is going to go.
So just to distill that for folks for whom that was a lot, essentially you think that what the Democrats will do is take this other position where they're going to vote on a shorter bill, on a short-term bill, and that's the only time they're going to have to vote with the Republicans. And then that will fail and for a lot of reasons that won't become law and the government will stay open without Democrats having to vote in favor of the Republicans' longer CR.
Correct. So it's a little bit of gamesmanship. The Republicans have the majority, allow a vote on an amendment, which would then, in return for that, Republicans could then pass the bill with a simple majority after whatever amendments Democrats add would fail because they don't have a majority. And so the Democrats could vote for what they think is better public policy, but then the Republicans would be able to pass the bill that passed the House with just Republican votes. That's at
And
least my thinking.
I
So
think it's important for people to understand because there's a lot of, Democrats who think the party should stick it to Republicans and say, we're not going to vote for anything. Y'all want a shutdown? You got us here. It's your shutdown. Like, they want to see a fight from the Democrats, and anything less would feel like a disappointment. And I think
Yeah.
it's important to kind of tease out for folks who are thinking that the challenge of a shutdown is, I heard you say two things. One is, well, when they furlough tons of essential workers and very few people are left in these agencies, in theory, Doge can kind of run amok and do even more than they're already doing. Who knows where that gets us? You said something else that's kind of intriguing and worrying, which is there's no strategy for reopening government. And why is that?
Well, what would be the path to get the 60 votes in the Senate that you would need at this point? It's one of these things where there's a standstill. Typically we see the House being the problem on these votes because the House Republicans typically are not very unified. This time round, they managed to get the votes and they passed their bill despite the fact that they had a slim majority. Donald Trump helped twist arms, up until that vote. And now the House Republicans have actually left town. So they're not here to actually come back if there's a shutdown to quickly pass some sort of 30-day short-term resolution to get the government back open. And if the Republicans can blame Democrats for shutting down the government and at the same time shut down the government, that might be the best thing for them, at least in the short term.
As a person who spends a lot of time reading headlines and news coverage, if government were to shut down, do you think Democrats would end up getting the blame? Like, would the media end up tagging Democrats with this?
It's a great question, and you never quite know. Right now, it becomes clear that the ball is in the Democrats' court right now. So the Democrats need to figure out what to do. So because of that, it's more likely that they would be blamed. But at the same time, you wisely point out, Jessica, that it's Republicans who have control of the government right now. They have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, and there's not much the Democrats can do. So maybe it wouldn't go that way, but I think the Democrats probably fear less who's going to get blamed than they fear empowering Trump in some of his crusades to shrink the size of government.
Yeah, that's a smart assessment. Uh, should we move on into? I mean, we're going to keep following this. The vote is going to happen on Friday, most likely,
Yes.
and we'll know in a little over 24 hours what's going to happen. Uh, what? Let's talk about tariffs for a moment. Today, Trump escalated his tariff war. He even threatened, I think, a 200% tariff on champagne. I know there's a joke in there somewhere, and then said, and then the Dow fell, I think, 500 points. All the headlines say it's in quote correction territory, and Trump says he's not backing off. What's your theory as to why Trump is so steadfast in pursuing tariffs? Really?
Okay, so this is a question that my readers have been asking all week. Everyone's trying to make sense of what he's doing here because it doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. If you recall 6 or 7 weeks ago, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, he actually almost defended Trump using tariffs, suggesting that tariffs can be used to gain leverage over other countries and that you can use them for national security purposes. You can use them to get things that are good for you. That was 6 or 7 weeks ago. And Jamie Dimon he's not exactly a hardcore Republican. He's more of a centrist Democrat, probably. And he heads the largest bank in the country. So people listen to what he says. Yesterday he said he says this tariff, this back and forth, this backlash that we've had, where one day Trump's proposing tariffs and then he backs off and then he doubles down, that the uncertainty caused in this environment is terrible for the financial markets and it's terrible for businesses. We had a group of CEOs that gathered at Yale yesterday, and they were, at least in private, it was reported that they were very concerned about what's happening. The uncertainty causes paralysis, and that businesses are not making decisions because they're not sure what the economy is going to look like as they move forward. So they're not willing to invest, they're not willing to expand, they're not willing to launch new products, and all of that is just generally bad for economic growth. So it is interesting to see what they, how people are reacting to these things, and everyone's trying to come up with an explanation. What is Trump doing here? I had another reader who actually had a pretty interesting explanation, at least worthy of discussion, which was that Trump has promised all these tax cuts and that he's got Elon Musk running around the government trying to get, $1 trillion. Sometimes Musk has said $2 trillion in savings, that somehow he can that they can save this money that then Trump can rebate back to taxpayers in the form of various tax cuts that he's promised. Well, people are not sure if you can get even $1 trillion, let alone $2 trillion in savings. And so another theory is that what he's trying to do is he's trying to run up revenue using tariffs and show that there is, X amount of revenues that would be generated with my current tariff policy, and that therefore the government's revenues over the course of the next 10 years will be much greater than currently forecast, and that they could then pass tax cuts more easily. And then there's, of course, the rules of the Senate and how all of that works. And another option is that they just throw out the accounting rules and say, extending the old Trump tax cuts, we'll just do that and it'll cost us nothing.
Right.
And
By decree.
so, yeah, so this is the type of stuff. This is where, when you get into the depressing political news, this is where it gets pretty depressing, because there's no consistency, or there's no intellectual honesty about what is actually happening here. I personally think it's a lot simpler. So, you are obviously a Trump watcher, and you saw him during his first term. I think Donald Trump it's pretty easy to see what motivates the guy. He loves to have attention. He loves to have the headlines. He loves to have the spotlight shown on him. He loves to be seen as a strong president. And this is one of those powers there, as we've um, seen over the course of the last few weeks. The pardon power is a power that the president has, that he can wield without really needing to talk to Congress or the judiciary or anyone else. Well, this tariff power, the ability that he has to slap tariffs, is also pretty interesting. Is one of the few absolute powers that he has. And so he can very easily command headlines. He can very easily beat his rivals, his opponents on the global stage, into submission. He can get people, running to the White House, desperate to try to make a deal so that they can stop some of these tariffs that he's talking about. It is a way for Donald Trump to act strong and to wield power in a way that he wants. He also has this, what I would call a somewhat crazy theory, that this is going to make America rich and strong. And all evidence over the last 100 years suggests that tariffs don't do that, that tariffs actually hurt everyone involved, and that despite the fact that during his first term, Trump said trade wars are easy to win, they're actually not. They're actually very complicated, and they can spin out of control quite quickly. And I think the stock market, that we've seen the stock market this week react to that. And if there was a coherent plan that involved tariffs, and that was explained, the stock market would not have crashed 10% this week.
Totally. I have heard all the theories you've just pitched. One of the challenges with this theory that it's designed, his revenue strategy is meant to increase revenues and offset the tax cuts, is that it's internally contradictory. He says the tariffs are meant to drive consumers to buy American goods, drive American companies to make goods in America. Well, if that's the case, then we're not buying the tariffed things. And so they're not getting the revenue. So it's like at odds with itself. The theory that I think makes sense is like a combo of what you said, which is he's using it as a cudgel to force open deals. Like
Yep.
Canada's agreed to renegotiate a trade deal we had with them because of tariffs. So that's one possibility. And then the other bounces off what you just said, which is he loves the presidential power it gives him. I am told by sources that he is annoyed. Everyone has said that the strong economy and the strong market was the Biden economy, and if he messes with the economy and tanks it and then brings it back by saying, "Oh, I made all these deals and I'm lifting the tariffs," it's then the Trump economy.
Okay. What does not again, that actually falls into that depressing category of political news
Right?
that
Like,
we're,
none of it makes sense.
that
I
we're
know.
willingly trying to tank the economy. I don't think that Donald Trump is that hard to understand. And as much as people like to attribute to him or to any politician really having a plan, I don't think that there's a plan here. I really think he's just reacting. And so the news this morning where he's placing a 200% tariff on wine and champagne coming from the EU. I mean, the other thing is, if there was a plan, you wouldn't just announce these tariffs on Truth Social. you know, it seems like I would bet that the vast majority of his advisors have no idea what he's about to propose,
Right.
and he just proposes it, and they're all in react mode. And the reason I can say that so confidently is we did see this guy as president for 4 years. And that's pretty much the way that 4 years went. It was chaos. There was not a plan. It was mostly chaos. And he managed to get through that. He managed to react to everything. But that's kind of the way that is his governing style, so to
But
speak.
do you think there's a combination this time where he acts sort of erratically and impulsively with the whether it's selling Teslas on the lawn or, Truth Social posting about tariffs, but in the background, what the former folks of Project 2025 are doing inside federal agencies is following a plan and is quite methodical and organized and deliberate.
I think that's an excellent point because there are people in the administration who absolutely have a plan, and Project 2025 is a big part of that plan. We see that every day being implemented. So I think that's an excellent point. Donald Trump may not be governed by that. He may not be the one following a plan. He may not have even developed a plan, but there are people in the administration who are doing exactly that.
Uh, Let's talk for a moment about Bernie Sanders. And this is a story that's not getting a lot of coverage, but you've been tracking it. What is going on with Bernie Sanders and these massive crowds he's generating across the country?
It's really wild, as Democratic voters are desperately looking to their party. They're very demoralized right now. They're looking for anyone in their party to stand up. And while there are a few people like Senator Chris Murphy in Connecticut who has been outspoken and has, increased his visibility dramatically, or someone like California Governor Gavin Newsom, who's now got a very popular podcast. um, it is really interesting that the guy getting the most attention out on a campaign trail, so to speak, is 83-year-old Bernie Sanders, who has had the exact same message for 40 years. And he's out there doing it again. And he has got people, coming to his rallies. They're excited to hear him. And there's something about his consistency because he's speaking to the moment. And I have to say, if you're a Democrat, you need to look at this guy because he has tapped into something over the years that people want, and he seems to be the only one giving voice to this. Now, some people have said, geez, Bernie Sanders is going to run for president in 2028. Well, he's 83 years old. It seems highly unlikely that at age 87 he would be running for president. He's actually suggested he's not running for president. But I think what he's doing is I think he wants to hand off his mantle to someone else. And the question is, Jessica, who's that going to be? I'm not sure yet, but that's what I think he's doing. And I think that a lot of Democrats who are interested in running for president should probably take a look at what he's doing because it is resonating. And he's one of the few out there that is actually speaking to the party right now.
Yeah, it's a democratic populist message. Let's wrap up with where we started. You had mentioned, sadly, it's also a depressing note, but you wrote today about the definition of fascism and why it applies here. Would you share that with us and what's specific about that definition that resonates?
So I have been, this is a piece that I have been sitting on for about a month. And it's because I don't want to kind of be over the top and say and call everything fascist, because, I think sometimes in our politics over the last several decades, we use that term far too loosely. It becomes more of an insult than actually what it is. And so there was a book that was written 20 years ago by Columbia professor Robert Paxton. It's called The Anatomy of Fascism. And what was interesting about it was that it did include this definition, and it's actually just one. He defined fascism, and again, this is 20 years ago. This is long before Donald Trump came down the escalator in Trump Tower and became a politician. But Paxton defined fascism this way: a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity, in which a mass based party of committed nationalist militants working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandons democratic liberties and pursues with violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internal cleansing and external expansion. I read that and I was like, wow, that sounds pretty familiar. Donald Trump and the MAGA movement he leads is consumed with this idea of community decline and victimhood. We've seen that ever since Donald Trump became a politician. His political machine thrives on this party of this committed nationalist militants. We could go back to January 6th. We could think of the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. We can think of many of the Christian nationalists that he identifies with, who, and this is key, operate in an uneasy collaboration with the traditional conservative elites. Okay, we could see how so many of the billionaires are, this strange populism that Trump has, where he's speaking to people who feel left behind, yet at the same time he's surrounded by billionaires, is a pretty interesting thing. But then the two other pieces that I found just shockingly on point were Donald Trump's policy agenda, whether it's mass deportations, ending birthright citizenship, dismantling DEI programs, that fits the definition of internal cleansing. And his rhetoric about taking over Greenland, taking over Gaza, making Canada the 51st state, taking over the Panama Canal, that reflects a desire for external expansion. And at the end of it, I'm like, my goodness, that is the textbook definition of fascism written by a scholar 20 years ago who analyzed the movements that Mussolini and Hitler led, as well as many failed fascist movements over the years. And and I come to this uneasy conclusion. My goodness, that's today. That's
Mm.
exactly what we're going today. And so I'm not saying that Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying, though, is that the movement he leads is following this fascist playbook that has been used before. And it may be by accident in his part, or when you mentioned, Jessica, that there are some people in the administration following a plan. There might be real fascists who are actually working with Trump and the person that he is and the personality that he is to push an agenda of fascism. And so I know that's been an accusation leveled at someone like JD Vance and some of the people that Vance has been with, but nonetheless, it's worth thinking about, because I don't think this idea that fascism, when are we on the verge of sliding into fascism? But based on this definition, we're already there.
And it's helpful to remind people that that doesn't mean we're on some sort of glide path to becoming a fascist nation. It means that
Right.
there is a dynamic at play that we have to be mindful of. And whatever it is that you do with your political information, organize, act, write, engage, keep this front and center as you decide how you want to take your, information in and decide how to participate in society at this time.
You did a very interesting Substack live chat a few weeks ago with Ann Applebaum that I watched, and
Isn't she
uh,
great?
would she is fantastic, and I had not heard her speak quite so eloquently as she did to this question of fascism. And you asked her a really interesting question at the end, which was, many people are asking you, many of your readers are asking you, when should we leave?
Yeah.
When should we leave the country? And what I loved about Anne's response was, she's like, we're not there yet. You know, we need to keep standing for what America stands for, and we need to keep fighting. And I loved that optimism from her. And I just got back from a week in Europe, which was fascinating. Seeing the European reaction to what's going on here. But I was really happy to get home, and I'm really happy to be an American. And
Um,
I hope that more people do that, because I hope more people feel that they need to get engaged in the fight, because this country is not lost by any measure. We are going through some really unbelievable historic times. These are the things, that will be written about 100 years ago, 100 years from now in the history books, and we're living them. But it is, every day is fascinating to see how our political system is reacting to these forces. So I would encourage everybody to stay very involved, because we need you.
and I want to say it is good and dedicated people who do the amazing work that you do who keep me optimistic. So I'm really grateful to you. Truly. Thank you.
Well, you're kind to say, but I love your newsletter as well.
Thank you.
And I think there's something about that. If you've tuned into this discussion, it's because you care. It's because you care about the world around you, and you want to know what's happening. So reading your newsletter, refreshing Political Wire on an hourly basis, staying
Minutely.
in staying involved, under keeping yourself informed is really a key part of this right now. So, anyway, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Jessica.
Me too.
Thank you.
Let's do this again sometime. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.